Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Tuesday, March the 1st, 2022. Yes, I'm wearing an eye patch. I'm wearing an eye patch because I injured my eye. I didn't actually injure my eye per se. I injured the flesh and the bone around the eye. So I'm wearing this eye patch because I am quite unsightly underneath. I'm not joking. I'm not exaggerating. It's quite hideous. Happy Shrove Tuesday, and it is also St. David's Day. So happy St. David's Day for any Welsh viewers. Let's take a look at the chat, and I want to thank you all up front for sticking it out. All right, still being here. To Anrun and Emmett Kelly's Earth, Jeff Godley, Quachalango, Anrun, Chogan 666, Dawn from Beyond, and Palcasso 88, Dan, Dr. Deadname, Moisha Diane. Yeah, there's a blast from the past. And Frothing Fanboy. No, nobody punched me. What happened was, it's rather humiliating to mention it, but I have these walking shoes that have very long laces because this is very intricate, in and out and in and out and in and out. But in any event, they're always coming loose. And I was walking home and in the dark, and I tripped on a shoelace. And it fell headfirst in the sidewalk. So, yes, Chokakin 666 says new apartment looks exactly like the hotel room. It's funny how that works, eh? Hello, Tom Anderson. And bringing back the golden age of piracy. Yes, I knew that was coming. Hello to Stassi. Yeah, faceplant. Yes, that's exactly what I did. And it's embarrassing. And that was 13 days ago. And I'm getting a little worried that it hasn't gone away yet. But I suppose eventually. What's the bone around the eye? It's called the occiput. Is that what it's called? Perhaps I've done something bad to that. But let's talk about. One day I'll try to explain how to tie a knot which doesn't untie or come loose, says Jim Smith. Okay. These shoes are infuriating because I'm constantly having to stop and then bend over or look for something to bring my foot up so I can lean over and tie them again. And of course, I'm always worried that if I really go like this, I'm going to snap both the laces, and that's not orbital. Okay. Thank you for that. Okay, let's talk about polarity, specifically unipolarity. That it was posited after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 that the United States of America, the GAE, as some people are calling it, the Global American Empire, was the world's sole power, superpower, even a hyper power. And so what does this mean? In effect, it means that the world does what the United States tells it to do, or else. As I've mentioned before, and I'm not joking, it is the position of the United States government, well, certainly the deep state, that the only country in the world, besides the United States, which can truly be said to enjoy sovereignty, there's the United States and there's Israel. And all the other countries, it's up for grabs. And we've seen this with Russia over Ukraine. And hey, I suppose some of you remember Kubrick's classic Dr. Strangelove, that hilarious scene when George C. Scott's talking about a possible nuclear exchange with the Soviet Union. And he says, yeah, I'm not saying we wouldn't get our hair mussed. What does he say? Something like 30, 50 million, depending on the breaks. People are actually talking like that for real. Now, But of course, the United States wouldn't lose 30 or 50 million people, even though its population is roughly about twice as big as it was when Dr. Strangelove came out, because they're just so good at it that they would, a first strike would simply take out all the Russian nuclear weaponry. Of course, what would happen if Russia, moved first? They don't go into that. But this is from Natalie Winters in the National Pulse. DC's foreign policy experts now demand regime change for Russia. Reminiscent of the establishment's failed calls for a regime change in countries like Afghanistan and Iraq, where military conflicts cost countless American lives and resources, the sentiment appears to be at odds with the majority of the country. Nearly 3/4 of Americans oppose playing a major role in the unfolding conflict. Benjamin Wittes, or Witts, I don't know how it's pronounced, a senior fellow in governance studies at the Brookings Institution, epitomized the establishment's ultimate policy goal for Russia in a recent tweet: regime change, Russia. Well, that's certainly bold, wouldn't you say? While the post drew significant criticism from other Twitter users, forcing Witts to issue a tweet for clarification of his stance, other mouthpieces for the establishment foreign policy think tank community championed Witts' proposal. This has to be the policy now, tweeted Dr. Alina Polyakova, formerly the founding director for global democracy and emerging technology at Brookings. Polyakova is now the president and CEO of the Center for European Policy Analysis, which has hosted events and featuring leaders from George Soros's Open Society Foundations. As you know, as I like to say, it has been difficult to tell for quite some time where the United States State Department ends and George Soros begins. I wonder where this woman, Alina Polyakova, was born. I have my suspicions, but there's an awful lot of people from the ex-Soviet Union in America. Bomb. Everybody. Also, America is wicked, but you should all be willing to die for it, despite its tremendous wickedness. Yes, that has to be the policy. Richard Haass, president of the Council on Foreign Relations, noted how the conversation has now shifted to include the possibility of desired regime change in Russia. Quote, just days ago, much of the world was focused on the unwanted prospect of regime change in Ukraine. Unwanted to whom? Now the conversation has shifted to include the possibility of a desired regime change in Russia. A week can be a long time in politics, which is one of the hoariest cliches in literature, but he manages to bungle it. The quotation is, a week is a long time in politics. All of us must now face the reality that we will not have peace in Europe until there is regime change in Russia. Then we should seek to welcome a new Russia as a partner for peace, wrote Carl Bildt, co-chair, European Council on Foreign Relations and World Health Organization special envoy for its access to COVID-19 tools accelerator program. Ooh, man, that sounds kind of similar, doesn't it? As National Pulse editor-in-chief Raheem Kassam explained for Newsweek, only America's ruling class and their beltway think tank enablers stand to profit from increased conflict and turmoil in Ukraine. Yes, I go away for 2 weeks and the world gets set on fire. But it's been one long continuing crisis since 2016, hasn't it? Oh my God, Donald Trump is a Putin plant. Oh my God, Trump stole the election. Resist, etc., etc. Oh my God, we have to impeach Trump. We have to impeach him even before he is made president. Yes, and we'll impeach him twice, even once when he's not president. And then Black Lives Matters. Yes. Peaceful protests with over 200 cities, American cities, being burned significantly, as well as looted and smashed. But of course, this was the fault not of the people who did it, but of white supremacists and the like. And then we had COVID-19, which happened coincidentally with Black Lives Matter. But no, don't stay home. Mass together, many thousands of people together, because when righteous people get together, they cannot spread respiratory illnesses, and the bloom has gone off the poisoned rose of COVID-19, to coin a phrase. And oh, look over there. Look at that shiny thing over there. Yes, COVID-19 appears to have been canceled because of low ratings. But when I watch American TV, I'm still seeing US government ads for boosters. Boosters, 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 boosters. That's the way out, apparently. Yes, you may have seen this. Valery Gergiev, who is one of the world's greatest conductors and was the conductor of the Munich Philharmonic, also the Rotterdam Philharmonic, and he has posts in Russia as well. His career in the West is effectively over. Why? Because he won't denounce Putin and his invasion of Ukraine. I lived through the Cold War. I'm sure some of you did too. You might remember that Soviet artists, classical artists, and the like would appear in the West. It was not demanded that they denounce their government's activities in order to do so. And Gergiev's management company, his longtime manager, dumped him as well. Oh, it is with a heavy heart, etc., etc. What a bunch of creeps. Of course, in a previous anti-Russian panic in Canada, a prominent Russian female pianist, Valentina Lisitsa, had a concert scheduled with the Toronto Philharmonic or Toronto Symphony Orchestra, and it got canceled for some reason. It's pretty obvious to me why it got canceled. It's because Stephen Harper said you have to cancel this. Of course, Lisitsa is from the Russian-speaking part of Ukraine, and Ukraine pretty much minority language, or was before the coup in 2014. But we all love the Ukraine so much that they teach us so much. They give us so many things, such as, you know how to spell Kiev? Well, of course, I'm not an idiot, and I know how to spell Kiev. No, you don't spell it that way anymore. What? Yeah, we're going to make you spell it in a way that you're going to look at it and you're going to say, how is that pronounced? And then when you spell it, or when you pronounce it the way that, you know, we've been pronouncing it in the West since, well, forever, you're going to be told by NPR and others, no, you're saying it wrong. Oh, how about the president, Zelensky? Do you know that it's spelt with 2 Y's? No, sorry, not going to do it. This way. We don't call Munich München. We don't call Cologne Köln. We don't call Prague Praha. We don't call Moscow Moskva, because that's how they pronounce it. And we don't spell Zelensky with 2 Y's or spell Kiev Kyiv. I'm sure the Ukrainians will have other orthographical marvels for us. Malmesbury Man on Twitter says, Gergiev's still on Apple Music, but for how long? Hard to see what might stop the dynamic unfolding right now. Peter Hitchens has an excellent column in this Sunday's Mail on Sunday. The Daily Mail. The Daily Mail. As a famous skit from The Story of the Twos by Harry and Paul. The Daily Mail. It's become absolutely unreadable. It was my favorite newspaper. My favorite newspaper used to be the Daily Telegraph. And then the lead up to the invasion of Iraq and the invasion of Iraq, I just thought, I can't read this rag anymore. It is just lies from start to finish. So I moved to the Mail, which of course is down market, but the Daily Telegraph has gone pretty down market in the last 25 years. And Britain, which can't even stop people in small boats from invading their country, is now acting like, oh, this is the Blitz again. Of course, Britain doesn't have a military to speak of anymore, but it can always cheer on Slavs killing Slavs. Let's be clear about this. This is the reason why so many people are just over the moon over this because it is Slavs killing Slavs. And the people who run our foreign policy establishments do not like Slavs. But I will get to the Ukrainian candidate, Chrystia Freeland, a little later. Hitchens writes, so they finally got their war, but what are they going to do now? This is the most avoidable, needless conflict in modern history. It was nurtured and hatched in the small minds of foolish men. There was a compromise available because they were too proud to consider it. Terrified civilians now weep outside the ruins of what once their homes. At this point, these noisy boasters turn out, as usual, to have big mouths and tiny fists. The Kremlin, responding to years of deliberate humiliation, taunting, and provocation, finally goes mad and invades a sovereign country. The mighty West hits back by chucking Moscow out of the European Song Contest. You might have thought that after 30 years of tough talk, they could have come up with something a bit better than that. But if you had observed, as I have, the steady, shameful shriveling of Britain's diplomatic soft power and harmed armed forces over the past 3 decades, you would not have been surprised. When I say they, I mean the army of Washington power worshippers, think tankers, politicians, and swaggering muscle men journalists, most of whom have never heard a bullet fly or seen a corpse. Since 1992, they have thought it was wise to treat Russia like a beaten dog. The inventor of that policy is the American neoconservative politician Paul Wolfowitz. He just happens to be the architect of that other great disaster, the Iraq War. The New York Times in March 1992, Hitchens continues, reported the existence of a Pentagon document believed to be the work of Wolfowitz. It said that from now on there should only be one superpower. It stated, our first objective is to prevent the reemergence of a new rival, either on the territory of the former Soviet Union or elsewhere, that poses a threat on the order of that posed formerly by the Soviet Union. The suggestion was ridiculous. The former Soviet Union was at that time a bankrupt mass of scrap metal, rust, and corruption. I was there, I know, Hitchens writes. Once the dust settled, it would find itself with an economy the size of Italy's and an aging, ill, diminishing population. The communist ideology which had driven its expansion and aggression was dead. Yet here were senior American political figures planning further humiliation. The outcry over this dangerous language caused a hasty rewrite, and when the document was published, it had been greatly toned down. Yet within a few years, under Bill Clinton and supported by expensive lobbying by U.S. arms manufacturers, the USA began the eastward expansion of NATO. Since then, NATO has never said who it is defending its members against, because such an admission would be an act of aggression in itself. But can only really be explained by a desire to keep Russia down. For what purpose, Hitchens asks. I've never seen any attempt by anyone to reply to the urgent condemnation of this decision made in 1998 by one of the greatest diplomats who ever lived, George Kennan. Kennan, inventor of the successful strategy of containment of the Soviet Union, came out of retirement to protest. He said NATO expansion was folly and correctly predicted it would create nationalist backlash in Moscow. Did the neoconservatives who created this policy really think Russia, with its huge intelligence services and vast, sophisticated foreign policy establishment, would not notice that it was being targeted? Russia guards its interests, as do all nations, just as rain falls downwards and water is wet. Out of this realization came Vladimir Putin, the direct consequence of the Wolfowitz doctrine, we created him. In fact, Wolfowitz and Clinton were simply wrong. China was the real danger. Think about this. In 1989, the Soviet Empire gave way to mass demonstrations in Prague and East Germany. It could have massacred protesters in Leipzig, Dresden, and Berlin, but it did not. After a few nasty but feeble attempts to fight demands for independence in the Baltic states and Georgia, Russia gave up its enormous empire in Europe and Asia. In return, Russia was treated like a pariah by the EU and NATO when it sought a civilized relationship with them. Hitchens continues, that same year, China's communists answered their people's demand for freedom by murdering them on the streets of Peking. In the years since, they have created an ever fiercer police state regime, tightened their dictatorial grip on Tibet, and menaced Taiwan by hugely increasing their military and naval power. They have also blatantly broken their promises to maintain freedom in Hong Kong and engaged in a shameful and racialist repression of the Uyghurs. This is a real threat, and the regime which makes Putin look relaxed. Yet we stay on friendly terms with them when their despots come to London and dine at Buckingham Palace. British police cravenly crush peaceful demonstrations of protest, lest our tyrannical guests are offended. We continue to pretend Taiwan is not independent. We cravenly shun the Dalai Lama for the sake of trade. Is it precisely because we are so feeble in this real struggle that we have to pretend to toughness in the supposed new Cold War with Russia? I often think so. And now, here we are again, according to Hitchens, in a moralizing frenzy. The BBC, which insisted on strict neutrality between Britain and Argentina in its coverage of the Falklands War, flings itself into an ignorant and one-sided coverage of the Ukraine crisis. A leading presenter proclaims from a city he weirdly calls Kyiv that Ukraine is a European democracy, in which case he is very easily satisfied. As my old friend Edward Lucas, no friend of Russia, put it in the Daily Mail yesterday, Ukraine is a country where oligarchs run media empires with politicians and officials on the payroll. The judicial system is a festering mess where arrests, prosecutions, and verdicts are used to score settlers between political and commercial rivals. Senior positions are bought and sold. Healthcare and education are plagued by kickbacks. The security service, the SBU, is infested with intrigue and sleaze and penetrated by Russian agents of influence. And Hitchens continues, justified outrage over the terrible harvest of war would be more convincing if we paid more attention to the hundreds of civilian casualties, many of them inflicted by Ukrainian armed forces in and near the breakaway regions in the country's east. A 2020 report by the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe said that between January 2017 and September 2020, there were 946 civilian casualties, of which 161 were fatalities. Among the casualties were 100 children. It would also be more convincing if our political and media establishment had not supported the NATO bombing of Belgrade in 1999 with major civilian casualties, the crazy invasion of Iraq in 2003, and the forgotten NATO bombing of Libya, also with its toll of dismembered children killed in supposed surgical strikes. That intervention destroyed Libya. Putin and the Chinese police state know that we did these things and see them as precedents for any crimes of the same kind they may commit later. That so concludes Peter Hitchens. Hey, do you remember when all of the hip people, all the influential people in the West, they were all carrying around Tibetan flags and appearing in concerts for Tibet and hands off Tibet? What happened to that? When was the last time you heard anyone carrying on about Tibet? A long time ago. Do you remember? Well, I remember very well. Oh, yes. The communists must be pushed out of the Soviet Union. Communism, got to get rid of it. And then when that happened, when it collapsed and the successor states collapsed, what was the response from the West? We're not interested in that anymore. That is boring. Oh, do you remember Nelson Mandela and Stephen Biko and all the rest of them? And we can't bear it. What's going on with the apartheid regime of South Africa? And then the Boers surrendered and the blacks took over, and South Africa became the rape and murder capital of the world. Do you hear very much about South Africa anymore? No, you don't. These people don't care about the Ukraine. And after this is all over, they'll go back to not caring about the Ukraine anymore, except those people, like Hunter Biden and the like, who profit thereby. Look at the people, the so-called security experts who write for the newspapers and magazines. I think I've gotten pretty good at this, at figuring out which of them are on the take. Here's a giveaway. They tend to publish books, and these books are the kind of thumbsuckers that are going to sell in the low thousands or the hundreds, and yet they keep being given book contracts. Why is that? Because this is a form of money laundering. Oh, what do the experts say about Ukraine? Just as, what does the experts say about COVID-19? It tends to be of a piece, doesn't it? Someone said on Twitter the other day, have you noticed that we're all being, reprogrammed about every 6 months or so now? Let's look at the latest from antiwar.com, which is a very good aggregator. White House rules out no-fly zone over Ukraine. Whew, I wasn't really looking forward to nuclear war. I don't know about you. U.S. sees no reason to change nuclear alert level. White House says U.S. can focus on 2 theaters as it did in World War II because the United States military is just as good as it was in World War II, right? It's even better now because they have trans people, and women can wear lipstick and nail gloss. So even better. Russia-Ukraine talks conclude, more scheduled. Russia launches rocket attacks on Kharkiv, bears down in Kiev. Zelensky lifts visa rules for foreigners who want to join fight. Do you see what this maniac did? He just, hey, you want an automatic weapon? Come on down and we'll give you one. Shortly thereafter, some of these videos started appearing of drug gangs moving from floor to floor on apartments. Oh, yes, I'm going to release all of the prisoners, including the violent ones, and give them guns too, because what could possibly go wrong? After vote, Belarus could host Russian nukes. Zelensky lifts visa rules for foreigners who want to join fight. Hungary will not allow weapons for Ukraine to transit its territory. Finland mulls NATO rethink after recent poll shows support. And I came across, David Stockman has a piece at anywar.com. George Kennan warned NATO expansion would lead to this. Mr. X is rolling in his grave, but who cares what George Kennan would have to say about anything? George Kennan knew a lot about the world, a lot about history, a lot about Russia and the Soviet Union. I can't say that he was a particularly great admirer of Russian culture, but he wasn't an idiot, and he didn't want pointless wars. Caitlin Johnstone writes on her Substack, every U.S. enemy is Hitler. Notes from the edge of the narrative matrix. It's just incredible how even after all this time, after all those wars, after all those lies, it's not even occurring to most mainstream Westerners to investigate whether the U.S. could have possibly had anything to do with starting the war in Ukraine. There's one asshole in the room who always starts shit. Anytime any shit is started, he's always been involved, and hardly anyone's even looking at him thinking, I wonder if that shit starting guy has anything to do with this. I'm convinced that mainstream culture's fascination with World War II has made us all dumber. Everyone just lives in this dopey children's cartoon now where every U.S. enemy is Hitler, and they're the brave hero who is fighting Hitler. Ukraine has no chance of winning this war alone, no matter how many weapons are sent to it. All weapons can do is make the war more costly for Russia, which is in the U.S. empire's interest to do. Stop pretending your calls for more weapons are anything more noble than that. You are not trying to save lives. Only the negotiation of a ceasefire can do that. All you're doing with your calls to arm Ukraine is helping the most powerful empire that has ever existed make this war more expensive for Moscow and hurt Putin's popularity at home and abroad. This was the USA's strategy in arming the Mujahideen in Afghanistan during the first Cold War to give the Soviets their own Vietnam, a costly quagmire that consumed their wealth and military focus for 5 years, contributing to their downfall. They've already reemployed this strategy in Syria, where a U.S. official openly admitted they worked to create a quagmire for Moscow. And Aaron Mate reports, here is the May 2020 comment of the now former U.S. envoy James Jeffrey that I referenced, in which he described his job in Syria as follows. My job is to make it a quagmire for the Russians. Hey, do you know that we, and by we, I mean the United States, Canada, Britain, and others, do you know whose side we were on in Syria and are still on in Syria? Al-Qaeda. Yeah, that's right. Al-Qaeda. They changed their name. They're not called Al-Qaeda anymore, but it's the same group. That's how clever these people are. Al-Qaeda was the greatest threat that the world had ever faced. Do you remember that? Al-Qaeda actually means the base, and it's actually kind of a clearinghouse for information, tactics, and such like. But no, it was the greatest threat in the world, and then somehow we end up on its side in Syria. Caitlin Johnson continues, they're hoping to pull off the same trick again to any extent possible. That's all this is. It's not about saving lives or stopping a war. It's about grand chessboard maneuverings to maintain U.S. planetary domination. The evil Michael McFaul tweeted, On February 28th, Ukraine will be Putin's Afghanistan. This will not save lives. In fact, if it is successful, it will ensure the loss of a great many more, as an unwinnable war drags on long after it could have been over. This doesn't benefit Ukrainians. It doesn't benefit Americans. It doesn't benefit Europeans. It only benefits the unipolarist agendas of a few powerful psychopaths. If you still want to support arming Ukraine on the basis that it will benefit the unipolar hegemony of a globe-spanning empire because you believe that empire's continued dominance is a good thing, be my guest. But again, don't pretend what you're cheering for is anything nobler than that. She had a piece on Medium as well. This is Caitlin Johnston. Russian propaganda is the latest excuse to expand censorship. And Mark Warner, that would be Senator Mark Warner, tweeted Friday, "I'm concerned about Russian disinformation spreading online. So today I wrote to the CEOs of major tech companies to ask them to restrict the spread of Russian propaganda." Well, it has been noticed by many people, including me, since this war started, that the Russians have had very little to say. The Ukrainians and their allies have had a great deal to say, most of which is a lie. And many of these statements are ridiculous lies. You all saw Sam Hyde making another appearance as the Ukrainian jet fighter ace, which was this obvious fabrication was bought by U.S. Representative Adam Kinzinger. Oh, so yeah, RT, formerly Russian television, is now, well, banned in Canada. Oh, and trending on Twitter today was ban Fox News. Maybe in Canada we can ban everything except CBC. Should have the CBC and the Globe and Mail. Why would we need any more news sources than that? Disinformation. Oh, and the BBC isn't all about disinformation. Deutsche Welle isn't all about disinformation. You know, Radio Liberty isn't all about disinformation. Sky News, Global News, etc., etc. David Stockman has a piece at UNS called "The Land Where History Died." In light of the grotesquely one-sided Ukrainian war news on the MSN, can well and truly said that America circa February 22 has become the land where history died. Even the sophomoric coverage of CNN and NBC, for instance, you would think that Ukraine's borders have been universally agreed upon by one and all for aeons, that the government in Kiev has done absolutely nothing to provoke Russian suspicion and anger, and that Uncle Sam, NATO, and the European Union have flitted around the neighborhoods on Russia's borders, merely cheerleading for democracy and selflessly passing out economic aid and cookies to the long-suffering Ukrainian peoples. Well, no. Today's hot war eruption in Ukraine would absolutely not be happening save for the violent coup of February 2014 that overthrew Ukraine's democratically elected pro-Russian president, and which coup was funded, organized, and choreographed by Washington-based neocons, busybodies, and arms merchants who otherwise had no reason for even existing in the post-Soviet world. Yes, indeed. And, what are the neocons after? I'll tell you what they're after. They are a death cult. I mean this with all seriousness. They are a death cult. They worship death. And what have they ever been right about? Nothing. So why do they still have any influence? That is one of the great mysteries of our time. Let's see. He continues that the U.S. policy the effect was to send Kiev on a path towards massive economic and military aid from the U.S., EU, and NATO membership that was bound to produce the adverse Russian reaction that George Kennan had warned about 2 decades earlier. As to the aid matter, Ukraine received only minor assistance from the West prior to 2014, but upwards of $15 billion since then. That included nearly $3 billion of military aid from the U.S., $6 billion of development and economic aid from Western donors, $3 billion of subsidized Ex-Im bank funding from the U.S., and $3 billion of other humanitarian aid. The effect was to turn Ukraine into a ward of Washington, a new post-coup fact on the ground that was blatantly obvious to Moscow. As to the adverse shock effect of the Maidan coup on Ukrainian governance and external policy, a map below tells you all you need to know. The dark blue parts of the map to the far east, Donbass, indicate an 80% or better vote for Viktor Yanukovych in the 2010 election. By contrast, the dark red areas in the West voted 80% or more for the Ukrainian nationalist Yulia Tymoshenko. That is to say, the skew in the Ukrainian electorate was so extreme as to make America's current red state, blue state divide seem hardly noteworthy by comparison. And of course, Russian law and culture has been heavily oppressed in Ukraine since the 2014 coup. Oh, yes, the glorious coup, when neo-Nazis, right sector, Azov Brigade, fired blindly into crowds and then, blamed it on the government. Yeah. Now, there is a concerted campaign going on to gaslight you into believing that there are no Nazis in the Ukraine. Yes, Putin may have gone overboard when he claimed that, one of the major reasons for this invasion was to denazify the Ukraine, but they exist and they are powerful. Now, how crazy do you have to be a Nazi in 2022? Very crazy indeed. So that gives you an idea of what these people in the Ukraine, right sector, Azov Brigade, are capable of. Any enormity whatsoever. They are holding up in apartments now, using civilians as hostages. And again, my advice is to not believe anything either side says. But again, with the proviso that a great many of these people cheerleading for the Ukraine in the West are being paid to do so and not acknowledging it. And again, no, it's the Russians who are the Nazis. It is difficult for us to understand just how infuriating they find this, given just how many tens of millions of them were killed by the Nazis in World War II. But yeah, so in 2014, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, a $4 billion loan turned out to be the straw that broke the camel's back. According to then Prime Minister Mykola Azarov, the extremely harsh conditions of the IMF loan presented by the IMF in November 2013 included big budget cuts and a 40% increase in natural gas bills. Those proved to be hills too high to climb for all the factions within the fractionated Ukraine polity. Accordingly, the IMF demands became a clinching argument behind the Ukrainian government's decision to suspend preparations for signing the association agreement with the EU. Instead, Kiev quickly pivoted to a deal with Russia in the fall of 2013, which was willing to offer $15 billion in loans without the harsh IMF preconditions. Also, Moscow offered Ukraine a discount on Ukraine's large gas purchases from Russia. Moreover, by that point, Ukraine was over a financial barrel, facing an external funding gap of $17 billion during the upcoming year, almost the level of the central bank's depleted currency reserves. The rest is history, as they say. The Washington neocons were not about to accept a pivot to Russia come hell or high water, so they swung into action, bringing all the instruments of the empire, the CIA, the State Department, NED, the NGOs, and favored Ukrainian oligarchs to bear on scuttling the Russian deal and removing Yanukovych from office. In a later interview with a U.S. journalist, in fact, Ukrainian billionaire oligarch and opposition leader Petro Poroshenko, who later became president, said quite clearly that the plan was to subvert the nation's constitution and install an unelected anti-Russian government that would deep six the deal with Moscow. There's a lot of interesting things on UNS, and Stockman is always interesting. Stockman, of course, was a senior economics official in the Reagan administration and former U.S. congressman. I noticed that during the truckers' protest in Ottawa last month, some people were very angry. And the people who were most angry were the people who weren't being talked about anymore. The intersectional people. Don't they know it's Black History Month? And what about the sufferings of the alphabet people? They're always suffering somewhere for some reason. But why is no one talking about this anymore? See, the Ukraine, where we have white people fighting white people, problematic, as the kids like to say. This is Greg Wilson, the Washington Examiner. Nicole Hannah-Jones, the New York Times writer behind the controversial 1619 Project, has moved on from history to geography with a puzzling pronouncement that Europe is not a continent and is apparently racist to believe otherwise. Jones, who tweets under the handle Ida Bay Wells, was met with a torrent of Twitter mockery Sunday after making the claim while discussing the war in Ukraine, as with her prize-winning but fact-challenged historical position that the United States began not with the Revolutionary War, but with a much earlier importation of slaves to North America. Jones was met by online bemusement. Quote, "What if I told you Europe is not a continent by definition, but a geopolitical fiction to separate it from Asia, and so the alarm about a European or civilized or first world nation being invaded is a dog whistle to tell us we should care because they are like us." In other words, why aren't they talking about us 24/7? It's Black History Month. Actually, of course, this woman, I don't know, did she ever look at a map? Yes, it is rather arbitrary, the distinction between Europe and Asia. Oh, you could say the Ural Mountains are the boundary. Oh, okay, I understand that. There are only two landmasses recognized as continents in the world, which are islands, which are genuine islands. One is Australia and the other one is Antarctica. Africa is not an island. It is joined to the Middle East. Yeah, it is, to the Gulf. And of course, North America is joined to South America as well. So it's got to be all Black people all the time. And apparently the Black people in the Ukraine has Black people. Apparently they've been suffering terribly because, of course, country invaded, being smashed, women and minorities, hit hardest. It's always got to be that story. Let's go to the chat. It's now women's. Oh, hello to Burke and Sultanoff. Who else do we have here? Oscar Toe, hello. And Gamion, Zen Master Football Analysis. Kiev Independent is another one, I think. He hurt the eye socket, says Oscar Toe. Yes, I believe that's what I did. I hope it's not permanent either. Yes. Hello to Gamion. Let's not forget what the GAE has done to the church, the Orthodox Church, says Yo Mama. We're always bad when it comes to information war, Oscar. Today they finally banned 2 major radio and TV stations. That's been the 5th column for years. Vineyard of the Saker is decent. It's a Chokin 666. Gamian says, I read Igor Magorov. I think his articles have been translated to English on RT. He's also on YT. Yeah, Mitt Romney. Rootless cosmopolite. Ooh, he jumped into the fray, railing on about treason. And I guess since now Ukraine is America's greatest ally, replacing Israel, Ukraine is not America's ally in any sense. But never mind that. Never mind that. Hello to Dr. Deadname. Where are all the strong women battalions? Yes. Did you see the beauty queen who signed up for to go into battle, and she was holding a fake rifle made of cardboard or some such? They burned alive the people at the Odessa Union Hall, says Chogokin 666. First ever global conflict with women at the helm should get interesting. Most ministers for defense in Europe are women. Well, the latest I've seen is that European countries are not going to get involved because then NATO would be declaring war on Russia. I've never seen so much Russophobia in my life, says Gamion, and I'd have to agree. Kevin is really doing the COVID face diaper thing wrong, says Anne Run. Yeah, and I'm just going to remind you that when, in an hour and 50 minutes or so, when this is over, when I go down to the lobby, I'm going to have to wear this and the mask. Yeah. I'm not looking forward to that. Did you see the soldiers making the Ukrainian POWs to the Donbass Children's Memorial? Says Chogokin 666. Yeah, they're now taking advice from Condoleezza Rice on this conflict, says Metal Mike. Putin invaded Ukraine because he was tired of KMG talking about COVID, says Palcasso 88. How long before Washington is paying bounties for dead Russian soldiers, says Urban Planner. Zen Master Football Analysis says there's a photo of hundreds of thousands of people in Germany all wearing face masks and holding Ukraine flags. It looks like a meme. You know, I first started hearing this, about 5-6 years ago, that apparently the once mighty, Bundeswehr of Germany, that it barely exists now. That it's not, as they say, operational, either on the ground or in the air. Oh, yes, the brave defenders of Snake Island. They never apologize for this. If RT is banned, will Dennis Miller, Chris Hedges, and Jesse Ventura lose their show? I briefly had RT about 15 years ago, and I used to watch Max Kaiser's show. I think that's the only thing that I watched. I have a problem with all these rolling news stations. When rolling news started, at least in North America with CNN, I was very excited because I'm a news hound. So I thought, wow, this is going to be 24-hour news, so there's going to be so many more stories. And then what? Seriously, you're going to repeat the same story every 2 hours or every hour? Are you really going to do that? And that's what they did. I see Kevin McCarthy is going to have a serious talk with those two Congress members who spoke with Nick Fuentes, says Oscar Toe. Shmuel Hyde. Yeah, that was very funny. Hello to John Vance. And, okay, hello to Clown Welt. Yeah, the invasion is taking far too long. How long has it been? What are we on? Day 5 or 6? It's been pointed out that people talk about the lightning victory of the Germans over the French in 1940. That took 2 months. Of course, the Israelis won the famous Six-Day War against the Arab Alliance in 1967. Israel's objectives were very small. I mean, they were clear. This wasn't open-ended. They were going to take the Sinai Peninsula and the Golan Heights and East Jerusalem. That's what they did. And, the war got stopped essentially by the Americans because the Americans were getting spooked after about the 4th day when they'd reached the Suez Canal. I've been reading about the Russian army that, the old Russian way of doing things, brute force, conscripts and brute force. What's that fellow? He called himself Viktor Sukharov, I think his name was. It was obviously a pseudonym, renom de plume. He wrote a series of books about the Russian military. It was just almost unbearable to read. These came out, in the 1980s? If you were in the Russian armed forces, you would just be smacked around half to death, or sometimes to death, for any reason or none. Hungary wants Transcarpathia back, says Clownveld. Well, I was thinking about this. If this went really J.G. Ballard, could we have Poland retaking Lwów, or Lemberg, as it used to be called? Because Western Ukraine is, properly speaking, Poland. I know a lot of them are still upset about this. Anran says, I remember a crap Peter Gabriel song about Biko or Beko or Benko or Bunko or however it was spelled. Benko is a Hungarian name. Yes, more jokes about my name. Okay. And as I was... No, let's talk about, we got to stick with this because, I've been gone for a while. And as I say, the world is on fire. Some great stuff from revolver.news, which Darren Beattie runs. And, of course, he was in the Trump administration. And then he was defenestrated because apparently, I don't know, he's a race realist or a nationalist. Trump has always cheering for the Ukraine, and the GOP has gone completely insane, just like the Conservative Party in Canada. Oh, the Liberals aren't sufficiently pro-Ukraine. Well, how could that be the case when Chrystia Freeland, to which country does she owe her allegiance? Canada or the Ukraine? I wouldn't want to bet on it. But this woman, who is now finance minister and deputy prime minister and was former foreign minister, her grandfather was a prominent Nazi collaborator who ended up as a U.S. military asset in Germany at the end of the war in 1945, and somehow ended up being translated to northern Alberta. Now, there were rules about this at the time, that people who'd worked with the Nazis were not to be admitted into Canada, but somehow he was admitted into Canada, and I got a pretty good idea why. Because the OSS, said, yes, you're going to take him, because he works for us. Chrystia Freeland's mother co-wrote the Ukrainian Constitution, and Chrystia Freeland and her sister co-own an apartment in Kiev. Ooh, nothing unusual about any of those things. Revolver. The globalist American empire would rather risk nuclear war than admit its own arrogance. Yeah. And Beatty, I suppose, he looks at the front page of the New York Times on January 23rd, and where's all the stuff about Ukraine? Well, teeny tiny thing down at the bottom there, because, oh, yeah, nobody cares about it. And then they decide everyone has to care about it now. I don't know, did Russia nuke Washington, D.C.? Or did, nuke Vienna? No. Oh, it's fighting with the Ukraine. And we all know about the Ukraine. 90% of Americans can't find it on a map. But never mind that. Way back in 2016, President Obama said something that was surprisingly cogent and astute in an interview in The Atlantic. This, again, is from Revolver. While speaking with Jeffrey Goldberg, of all people, Obama articulated the American people are simply not willing to go to war in Ukraine. To put it simply, the Ukraine is simply not a core American interest that is worth killing and dying over. From The Atlantic, Obama's theory here is simple. Ukraine is a core Russian interest, but not an American one, so Russia will always be able to maintain escalatory dominance there. The fact is that Ukraine, which is a non-NATO country, is going to be vulnerable to military domination by Russia no matter what we do, Obama said. Goldberg asked Obama whether his position on Ukraine was realistic or fatalistic. It's realistic, Obama said, but this is an example of where we have to be very clear about what our core interests are and what we're willing to go to war for. At the end of the day, there's always going to be some ambiguity. According to the Associated Press, just 26% of Americans say the U.S. should play a major role in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, in a new AP NORC poll. President Biden has argued that fundamental American values are at stake in Eastern Europe. What would those be? Graft? Corruption? Like all of America's wars over the past 3 decades, a war on behalf of Ukraine would not be of any benefit to America or the American people. It would only benefit the privileged few oligarchs who control the levers of power in the globalist American empire and their bought and paid for stooges in media, academia, and politics. Ukraine crisis has now become the Russia-Ukraine war, thanks to the stubbornness, arrogance, and incompetence of America's discredited foreign policy elite. Yet another entirely avoidable conflict has gone hot. So far, Biden has resisted the calls for escalation and even war that are emanating from the Democrat military, industrial, diplomatic, NGO, neocon complex, which is always looking for new places to throw away American wealth and lives. But he should have resisted these forces from the very beginning and sought a diplomatic solution with Russia, which might have involved something as simple as demilitarization of the Ukraine and a signed treaty promising Ukraine would never join NATO. Yeah, just like Austria. That's right. Austria is neutral, and it's never going to join NATO. It is not allowed to join NATO. It's really simple. It's really simple and easy what the Russians want here. They don't want the Ukraine to be a dagger thrust at its heart. And the fact that the Americans and NATO are insisting, sure, NATO's going to join the European Union. This would be even more of a farce than Greece joining the European Union. Oh, and of course that Ukraine is going to join NATO. So what they are saying is, yes, we are insisting that that Ukraine be employed by NATO as a dagger at Russia's heart. So another piece from Revolver. The American response to Ukraine's situation is baffling. For Vladimir Putin and the Russian people, the invasion of Ukraine is Russia's most momentous action since the fall of the Soviet Union 3 decades ago. For civilians in Ukraine, the war is their homeland's gravest calamity since the Second World War. But for the globalist American empire, it's all one big dumb joke and a chance to strip Russia of one of gays' most essential freedoms, internet pornography. And here's a tweet from Visegrad24. Pornhub cockblocks Russian users. Russian users who tried to go on Pornhub were presented with a message saying the content is blocked, along with the Ukrainian flag and a message of support to Ukraine. The gays' response to Russian invasion of Ukraine is a dark look into the immaturity, frivolousness, mental instability, and passive aggressiveness that characterizes the ruling class of America and their ideological allies. For gay, Ukraine isn't a real war about real issues. It's a comic book movie, a childish morality play, a war of PR and Reddit-isms rather than flesh and blood. If the West saw Ukraine and its cause as truly important, something worth paying a price to assist, it would sanction Russia's energy sector, but they do not. Even the globalist American empire must sometimes face reality. So instead, we get a parade of symbolic sanctions, passive-aggressive gestures of anger and hostility. In fact, the tactics the gay uses against Russia, social ostracism, deplatforming, and performative public condemnation, are the same feminine tools that it uses domestically to ruin the lives of people who use a politically incorrect word or donate to the wrong protest. Congressman Eric Swalwell called for kicking out all Russian students in America. Canadian politician Kevin Falcon demanded that all Russian drinks be yanked from the province's liquor stores. Falcon is the leader of the Liberal Party of British Columbia. He's the opposition leader, and he will probably become Premier of BC one day. And performative, the Ukraine, Kevin Falcon, I've rarely seen a politician as embarrassing as this clown in my life. Oh, I had a bit about this in the original version of the piece that I wrote for VDARE about the Conservative Party and Aaron O'Toole. There was a controversy about Kevin Falcon winning the leadership of the Liberal Party, and guess what it had to do with? Sikhs. Yes, this happens in every election. Suddenly, this instant phantom army of Sikhs appears. Money changes hands. A lot of money changes hands. Who are these people? Well, many of them are legal members because you can't be the member of two political parties at the same time. Many of them live in India. Many of them are duplicate people, and many of them are dead. But this fellow called Jazz Johal was a big deal in our local media, BC media, and a former, government flack, essentially lowered the boom on this gross act of corruption, saying, no, you can't talk about this because it's xenophobic and racist. And of course, it just happens to happen in every single leadership campaign. So what is this all about? Well, Richard Moore, the chief of MI6, military intelligence in Britain, he, as the joke goes, said the quiet bit out loud. With the tragedy and destruction unfolding so distressingly in Ukraine, we should remember the values and hard-won freedoms that distinguish us from Putin, no more than alphabet people rights. So let's resume our series of tweets to mark hashtag LGBTHM2022. The last time I checked, he had scrubbed all of his tweets. There's a few up now. This was terribly embarrassing to him, but now he's rabbiting on about the Ukraine because we all care so very much about the Ukraine. And if you don't, you're a wicked, wicked person. Oh, yes, I mentioned Mitt Romney, that schizophrenic clown. Oh, no, let's go to Matthew Dowd, who was what, a Bush speechwriter, if I recall correctly. Let me make this perfectly clear. Putin is Emperor Palpatine. The Ukrainian people and all those who stand up for democracy around the world and here in America are Ray Skywalker, Jyn Erso, and the Rebel Alliance. Pick your side. Universal mental retardation. Exhibitor Relations says, times like this, you know, DC Marvel would join forces to fight this tyranny. Ooh, how about not releasing the Batman? In Russia, Rahim Kassam tweeted, foreign affairs experts in DC are both notorious soy chuggers and literally don't understand a thing about realpolitik. It's amazing to watch, but don't get close because they're creeps too. Oh, the Simpsons have come out for Ukraine, and the Ukraine is demanding that Twitter remove Russia from it. Yeah. Oh, and look, here's Hitler. And he's stroking the chin of little Vladimir Putin because, you know, the Nazis and, you know, the communists, certainly after 1941, they just got on together so well. And it wasn't at all the biggest bloodbath in human history. But never mind that. We're going to meme everyone into thinking that it's the Russians who are the Nazis. And not the Ukrainians or even the Germans, I guess. Maybe the Germans have finally been absolved from this burden because it's, you know, it's the Russians. It's the Russians who are the real Nazis. NPR, very helpful as always. Thread, Russia's attack on Ukraine means there is a stressful news cycle ahead of us. The reality of conflict is always a shock to the system. Here are 5 ways to cope. And the perennially idiotic Julia Jaffe tweeted, why I still can't understand is why. Why is Putin doing this? Why? Yeah. You just keep telling us how they're the wickedest people in the world, but you seem to have been surprised by this. How might that? Why is that? Huh? Mary Harrington writes in Unheard yesterday, perhaps the defining feature of our post-liberal era is the increasingly overt repoliticization of supposedly neutral economic, cultural, and political institutions. Among many examples, the most internationally significant instance of this is the abandonment of any pretense that international commerce is apolitical. Unlike privateering in the Azores in the age of Napoleon, today this happens on a scale that impacts us all. Suspending certification for the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline and more generally Russian energy exports will hit the cost of living across Europe, as will excluding some Russian banks from SWIFT and BP's exit from a £14 billion stake in Russian energy company Rosneft. On top of this, U.S. corporations are now being invited to join in the pressure for Russia of their own accord. Some are taking up the invitation. Elon Musk recently confirmed his Starlink satellite network would provide internet over Ukraine in response to Russian attempts to cut off online access. Ukraine's Vice Prime Minister Mikhailo Fedorov has called on payment providers such as PayPal, MasterCard, and Visa, as well as social media platforms such as YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, to take Ukraine's side in the conflict too. Yeah, who's in charge? Who's in charge now? Harrington concludes, we can only pray the current crisis eases soon, but even if it does, the effects of this now comprehensive repoliticization of global commerce will be with us permanently, and not just in the economic aftershocks, for you can only break the fourth wall once. Big tech and energy markets have now been explicitly conscripted as tools of great power conflict. Privateers on the scale of an Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg are actors with an unnerving reach. This development arguably just moves the West to where China has been for some time. But one thing is certain, free trade Tories can forget global Britain. There's no road back to naive commercial internationalism now. Even if we wanted one, we would be wise to calculate our food manufacturing and commercial dependencies accordingly. So the State of the Union is tonight, is it not? Okay. Russia hasn't used full might yet, according to Drudge. Congress told expect 10 to 20 year war. What? No. No, I'm sorry. These people are crazy. See, they want a 10 to 20 year war because it would be Slavs killing Slavs, which they love. And also it would enormously weaken Russia. And it would also make Ukraine even more of a puppet of the West than it is already. So apparently they're just going to meme this into existence. There are a couple of sites which are actually determined to provide us news about what's going on in the Ukraine. And one of them is a Twitter site called Russians with Attitude. Yes, Ukrainian authorities giving out Kalashnikovs to anyone who wants them in Kiev seem to be very determined to make civilians fight. Let's see if there's any late news here. Huge explosion of city administration building in Kharkov. Confirmed. It's being reported that the Azov battalion has set up a recruiting station there. Unconfirmed. Summary of today's events by Vladislav Ugolny. Pro-Russian channel, take with grain of salt, etc., but it's the best outline I've seen. Kiev direction, fighting continues in the northwest of Kiev near Irpin. In the southwest, fighting continues near Vazilkiv, where our advanced units hold their positions. Military facilities in Brovary, northeast of Kiev, were hit by a missile strike, and Russian vanguard units are also operating there. No full-fledged combat operations have yet been taking place for this locality. The army is concentrating in this direction, and the blockade of Chernigov, Mina, and Priluki continues. And yeah, it's one thing to say that, yes, brave Ukrainian resistance. All right, okay. How is the battle going? You must have noticed this yourselves. You know, if you look at coverage of previous wars, you saw a lot of maps with arrows. But no, we have replaced maps with arrows with, memes. Because I guess maps are hard. Maps are hard. And they're not as fun as memes. I suppose they can be faked, What else is this about? Well, a prominent Ukrainian member of the parliament, Kira Rudik, said, quote, "It's a critical time because we fight for this new world. We fight for this new world order. We are protecting not only Ukraine, but all the other countries." No, they're not, actually. Not at all. But that's the way these people like to speak. And, oh, yes. Yes, back to the MI6 chief. Richard Moore, he, him. Yes, he has his pronouns in his Twitter bio. Of course he does. Moore then went on to describe the experience of an alphabet person agent who told them, "I had to move for the job when I joined MI6, so I was relieved to find out there was an alphabet people network group. Through the group, I've made some great friends in the office, and it's reassuring to know it's there for support if I need it." So there's a person who was accepted by MI6 and didn't understand that British intelligence has been riddled with alphabet people for close to a century. Come on. I don't think so. And let's see, one of the other, Clint Ehrlich has been good about this on Twitter. Oh, Tucker Carlson's a traitor, or close to a traitor. was cosmopolite Senator Mitt Romney. Of course, as stated previously, the Ukraine is not an ally of the United States. And we're hearing similar talk in Canada, that if you are not supporting Ukraine, you are a traitor. Oh, these are the same people who don't believe in Canadian sovereignty over Canadian territory. These are the people calling other people traitors. And of course, the idea of some sort of border territorial integrity of the Ukraine is an absolute joke. But let's all pretend that that's a thing. A good piece in the American Mind by Michael Anton. Everything is fine. What are you complaining about? However things might look to a certain apocalyptic cast of mind, Canada did not recently take major steps toward tyranny. The measures enacted under the rubric of the Emergencies Act of 1988, including censorship, bank freezes, asset seizures, arrests for unspecified crimes, pretrial detention, denial of bail for peaceful protesters. These things might appear tyrannical to a paranoid, but remember the honking and the blocked streets, the inconvenience, the lost revenue as businesses weren't able to operate at peak efficiency. And all good conservatives know that GDP is the one true metric of human flourishing and societal health. Some Americans may look north and worry, but they should be reassured that can and will never happen here. And it isn't even all that bad up there. Order must be maintained after all. No one has a right to block the streets or disrupt traffic. What might have happened had the trucks prevented emergency vehicles from getting to the scene of some crime or accident? Granted, that didn't happen, but it might have. Pointing out the fact that the protesters would likely just have moved. One Canadian police chief called them the most cooperative and reasonable protester he'd ever encouraged, well, that's excusing insurrection. And pointing out the fact that no one raised this concern about Black Lives Matter is whataboutism, which is a right-wing trope. More to the point, BLM and Antifa have every right to block streets and to stand cheek by jowl in the middle of a pandemic when everyone else is in lockdown because their cause is noble. As Mitt Romney helpfully explained, when Antifa beats people and burns cities, that is good, because they are fighting Nazis. Besides, it's hypocritical to be against BLM looting and burning cities, but in favor of truckers blocking streets. What are you, a hypocrite? Michael Anton continues. Above all, Trudeau canceled the emergency. The system worked. The powers were invoked, used to resolve the crisis, and then rescinded, exactly as it's supposed to happen. That is, except for those powers the government has quietly made permanent. But no one should worry about that. It's necessary to prevent a future crisis from getting out of control. Besides, it's not as if any precedent was set. I mean, supposing some other protests were to break out against some other government policy, Trudeau or some successor wouldn't dare invoke the act again. It's an iron law of politics that the successful use of a given measure always discourages its future use. As for the idea that this first use will create a chilling effect, that's paranoid fantasy. Not a single person inclined to protest in the future or inclined to support a protest with money or supplies will be held back for fear of being beaten in the streets, arrested, and held without bail, or having their bank account frozen. It's very sad that a bunch of Americans who call themselves conservatives and believe themselves to be patriotic have spun themselves up to worry that the American government, in conjunction with those whom the paranoids insist are its corporate allies or even masters, are gearing up to do here what Trudeau just did in Canada, which again was not totally unjustified, in fact, totally justified and not that bad. It's also not the least bit out of line with what we conservatives cherish as Anglo-American liberties. For what could be more express the spirit of Magna Carta, the Glorious Revolution, the Declaration and Constitution, and the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms than arrests without charge, pretrial detention, denial of bail, asset seizures, beating peaceful protesters in the street, trampling with the horses, and then laughing about it. Anyway, as justified, or at least non-worrisome, as all that is up to here, only the tinfoil hat crowd worries about it happening down here. In fact, no one in America ever goes to jail for participating peacefully in a protest. And before you whine about those grannies hunted down by the FBI for walking into the Capitol through a door held open by Capitol police officers and then taking selfies from inside the velvet ropes, well, just remember that she was participating in an insurrection intended to overthrow our democracy. What would you have the state do against that kind of threat? Ditto regarding alleged pre-trial detention. Granted, more than 100 people were in jail, i.e. detained, denied bail, and awaiting trial, and about 70 still are, some of them who never even entered the Capitol. But against a threat like that, again, what is the state to do? Let them out so they can take more selfies, or worse, sit at the speaker's desk and carry around her podium again? The real threat, as Judge Zia Faruqi said during an April detention hearing, is that one or more of these people still harbors the belief, even after the election results were certified, the Electoral College was processed, that he continued to harbor the belief, the false belief, that something untoward was happening with the democratic process. America, of course, never has and never will punish thought crimes. But when thought crimes might lead to real crimes, can the state just casually let them slide? Anton continues, I've heard some grumbling about kids taping their parents' conversations and turning the tapes over to the FBI, and even being encouraged to do so by the feds. It's frankly astonishing that conservatives, who are supposed to stand for law and order and for raising the next generation with sound morals, gripe when children act as upstanding citizens. It's not as if tyrants have ever weaponized this tactic before. Conservatives are supposed to know history, so why don't they know that this has never happened and isn't a threat? Plus, as all religious conservatives know, confession cleanses the soul. Standing up in front of a hard-left Obama or Clinton-appointed federal judge and weeping that your actions were the worst thing since the murder of George Floyd, because you know that if you don't, your 4-year sentence in a federal lockup will suddenly become 10, well, that makes you a better person. Second, there is no desire on the part of American tech or media companies to censor or deplatform Americans, just as there is no desire on the part of American banks to punish or debank Americans for unpopular opinions. In fact, none of that has ever happened here at all. And when it has, those to whom it did deserved it. And Anton has much more on this. Highly recommended. And you can find this at AmericanMind.org. We are all soldiers in this war. We're all Ukrainians now. No, we're not. This is from Glenn Pearson at National Newswatch. It now appears that Vladimir Putin greatly overestimated his military might or underestimated Ukraine's. The answer is likely both. Yeah, let's make definitive statements like that. What, 4 or 5 days into a conflict? But even more remarkable victory, the Ukrainians are winning, has been one of images, technology, and individual valor. While video of Putin has been file footage from previous venues, the faces of the Ukrainians are shown in real time in devastating situations, and most of them are fake, but never mind that. Never mind that. Oh, then there is the ghost pilot of the Ukrainian Air Force who was supposedly shot down several Russian fighters and bombers. And then there is Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, which he spells with not two Y's, but an I before the Y, fighting the Russians with a simple flak jacket. And when were these pictures taken? They're not contemporary. With a grit equal to that of his fellow citizens. His weapon of choice isn't a rifle or a rocket-propelled grenade, but a cell phone from which he talks to the world, and not just his military commanders. Where is he? Nobody knows. He could be in Kiev. He could be in Western Ukraine. He could be at an American military base. We don't know. These people. They claim to be the adults in the room, the people who get it, the skeptics, the people who don't do their own research. Of course, that's what they all do. Because on what subjects do they manifest any expertise? Oh no, if the Ukrainian government puts out a tweet or a picture or a meme, well, it has to be true because they're Ukrainians, and they would never lie. Never, ever, ever. The Canadians are really, really getting into this. There are an awful lot of people of Ukrainian descent in Canada. I've heard estimates of 10 to 15%. The difficulty with that is, of course, is like any of these other groups, people who came over in the 19th century, in the typically late 19th century, and, with regard to the Ukrainians, they have been assimilated. They have intermarried for generations. Very few of them attend Ukrainian religious services. To give an example, there's a Ukrainian Catholic church in Eastern Rite in Victoria, not far from here. It's not a very big church. There's not very many people in it because, the fourth or fifth generation, they just have little interest in this. But Chrystia Freeland, it's as if she never left, even though she was not born in the Ukraine. She was born in northern Alberta. I'm going to read from Wikipedia. Her father, Donald Freeland, was a farmer and lawyer and a member of the Liberal Party, and her mother, Halnia Chomiak, was also a lawyer and ran for the New Democratic Party in Edmonton Strathcona in the 1988 federal election. And yes, she got a degree in Russian history and literature from Harvard, and then participated in activity in the Soviet Union, which might lead more, cynical people than me to come to the conclusion that she was a CIA agent. But let's talk about her grandfather. Now, Chrystia Freeland cannot rightly be blamed for the activities of her grandfather, where she can be blamed for obfuscating what he did and allying herself with the Banderists, as they are called. She and her office lied repeatedly about the story of her grandfather, who was a leading Ukrainian Nazi collaborator. And yes, but this story was exposed by the Globe and Mail. She'd known about this for years and years and years. And, well, she denied it. And she got her office to deny it. Now, Chomiak was obviously put in a terrible position. I've never been put in a position like that, and I suspect few of you have either. But the reason that Freeland felt the need to obfuscate this, as I said, and also that she has been caught marching twice with Banderite groups, Banderite symbols, suggests that her hatred of Russia derives from her desire to avenge her Nazi collaborator father. Yes, Krakow News. He was Michael Chomiak was editor of this. And as I say, he was considered very highly by the Nazis. He wasn't abandoned when they retreated westward. They kept taking him with them and moving them further and further west, eventually ending up in Bavaria, I believe. It turns out that there is a considerable literature. Oh, I should say something about Stepan Bandera. He was a Ukrainian nationalist. Well, yeah. He was born in Galicia. And again, what's Galicia? Well, Galicia doesn't exist anymore, but most of the Ukrainians in Canada come from Galicia. And yeah, was that the Ukraine? Was that always the Ukraine? No. The Ukraine, as Putin quite recently pointed out, is a Leninist creation. Stepan Bandera allied himself with the Germans, with the Nazis, and his group, the OUN, went on a killing spree in that part of the world, killing hundreds of thousands of, well, he liked to kill Russians, but probably even more than Russians, he loved to kill Poles and Jews. And he killed hundreds of thousands of them. He is considered one of Ukraine's greatest heroes. There are monuments to him in the Ukraine. You very often see his face when Ukrainian nationalists are marching in places like Donetsk or even in Toronto, Ontario. Yeah. I call Chrystia Freeland the Ukrainian candidate because, again, to which country is she loyal? And I don't really have an answer to that. So I came across some very long articles by Richard Sanders that has gone into tremendous detail about Chrystia Freeland and her ties to Nazis, not simply through her grandfather, but through contemporary Ukrainian Canadian organizations. And it is rather disturbing stuff. Let's see, it's at coat.ncf.ca/research. Yes, that Freeland was raised as a little Ukrainian nationalist, and I've complained about this in the past. Freeland doesn't even have the excuse that Ernst Zundel had. And not that long ago, I was complaining that Zundel was a typical modern immigrant to my country, bringing their poisonous parochial quarrels with them. And Freeland has embraced this throughout her life. She has made it clear that she is on the side of the so-called nationalists or radical ultranationalists in the Ukraine, and other people would be a little bit shy about participating in a march where people were holding up pictures of Stepan Bandera, but not Chrystia Freeland. If she were simply a scholar, well, that would be a little different. Yes, my grandfather was a Nazi collaborator. Those were different times. Those were difficult times. You didn't like to say no to these people because, you ended up in Dachau or with a bullet to the back of the head. No, she could have said that, but no, she didn't. And she stuck up for him and continues to stick up for him. And let's go back to the chat here. If I seem a little discombobulated here, it's because I'm getting used to looking at the chat here and such like with one eye. As mentioned previously, it's unsightly, but it doesn't affect my vision. But having one eye does affect my vision, and I'm looking forward to the lack of peripheral vision, as I say when I go down to the lobby and into the street. Oscar Toe jokes. I hope this is a joke. Zelensky just spoke from his bunker and said he saw Putin give a Kiev trans the evil eye. Okay. Victoria Newland, yes. She was the woman responsible for the coup of 2014. Freeland was born in Canada, in Peace River, northern Alberta, close to the British Columbian border. Augsburg, Bavaria, says Quachilango. Okay. Is the eye the reason you haven't moved yet, Kevin? Asks Anran. That's part of it. Where's your treasure? One eye, Kevin says, yo mama. What else do we have here? KMG sounds like Peter Lavelle today, asks True Greenberg. Who is Peter Lavelle? I guess I could always look him up, Peter Lavelle, American journalist and host of Crosstalk, a political talk show on the English language TV channel Russia Today. Okay. I guess I don't know that I've ever seen him, actually. I don't. Look, I'll say this, all right? Putin has made it clear for as long as he's been in power that he seeks peace with the West, that he seeks peace and accommodation with the United States and the other Western powers, and our response to this is to slap him down, to call him evil, to, oh, yes, your country's disappearing literally demographically. Isn't that hilarious? And yeah, we're going to make deals in China because we love China because they have so much money. Political repression? Social credit nightmare? What are you talking about? No. Russia's the evil country. Oh, yeah, and its economy is about as big as what, Spain's? So that has nothing to do with anything. It's just, look, so much of this it's ethnic animus. Okay, I'll just leave it at that. It is ethnic animus. That my maybe great-great-great-grandfather was roughed up by Cossacks in Odessa in 1881 after the Tsar was assassinated. And it makes no sense. Makes no sense. As I've mentioned previously that the West's decision to push Putin into the arms of China is the most disastrous foreign policy ever since Anthony Eden pushed Mussolini into the arms of Hitler over a war in Abyssinia in 1936. So, no, I don't, I'm going to be accused of being a Russian apologist anyway. But my point is simply, there was no reason for any of this to happen. Well, no logical reason for it to happen. COVID-19, we're so over that now. It happened so quickly. It happened so very quickly. Yeah, again, the reviews had turned solidly negative and the ratings were down. And hey, look, there's a shiny thing over here in Ukraine. 500 block of Yates Street, deadly stabbing last night. That's just a few blocks away from where I am right now. I saw a sign, a handmade sign, which was taped onto what we call hydro poles here in British Columbia. They're electrical poles, lighting poles. And it said drug dealer, and then it mentioned a room with the city center, what was formerly the city center motel, which is now a homeless shelter, which is half a block from here, as opposed to the other homeless shelter, which is, well, right across the street, and the other homeless shelter, which is 2 blocks down the road. And this man's hotel room and his name was mentioned as well. I don't know whether this was an attempt to, seek trade, or whether attempting to alert the police or some such. Not that the police would care. Pretty much all of the restrictions across Canada have ended. The silly mask mandates are still going to be around for a couple of weeks. However, there is one province in Canada that has decided to say, nope, we're just going to keep the paranoia going for as long as we can. And that would be my own province of British Columbia, where the mask mandate and the vaccine mandate are not scheduled to end until the end of June. Yeah. And Dr. Bonnie Henry said it was kind of politics and kind of science, which I suppose that means that Bonnie Henry knows a lot of people, women of both sexes, who are going to start screaming in agony if they don't see everyone wearing masks. I still see plenty of people in Victoria wearing masks outdoors, even when they're alone. But now here's a tragic story from the CBC. The trunks have left Ottawa, but phantom honking lingers for many downtown. This is by Nicole Williams. Post-traumatic stress from weeks of honking is a temporarily mild trauma, psychologist says, but wait until we get long honking. People claiming to suffer from long honking. Kevin, obviously not me, because I don't live in Ottawa, uses one word to describe the first days of the protests in downtown Ottawa: torture. Literally, there were trucks right underneath me, said Kevin, who did not want to provide CBC a last name for fear of reprisal. It was one thing for me, but I've got animals. I've got 3 cats, 2 dogs. So yeah, it was torture. It's been pointed out. There's a whole bunch of these people who may or may not be making this up. Oh, yes, my cats are suffering. My dogs are suffering. None of them ever mentioned children. That torture is the reason behind an ongoing class action lawsuit which sought an injunction prohibiting any participants in the convoy protest from using vehicle horns in the vicinity of downtown Ottawa. Yeah, there's another lawsuit where they're asking for something like $386 million against various truckers. And they won. Well, they won the first round anyway, which was held in an ex parte in camera hearing. Ex parte means the other side, i.e. the truckers, is not allowed to represent themselves. And in camera means secret. Yeah, that's just how corrupt and tyrannical my country has become. The woman leading this suit, called Zexi Li, Zexili, described as a Chinese national working for the Canada Revenue Agency and 21 years old. Yeah, and this all makes perfect sense. Some people being annoyed. The honking always ended at 6 p.m. at night, and then there was a court order weeks ago which stopped it, permanently. It's clearly that's worth $386 million. Oh yes, and the lawyer who was arguing the suit is described as one of Canada's leading human rights lawyers. Dr. Peter Liu, an Ottawa-based, or Ottawa, one might say, clinical psychologist, says it's possible people who are phantom honking are experiencing a mild trauma. These sounds become a sort of embedded in mind, kind of like the way trauma leads to flashbacks. Even long after this has happened, the brain is still in hypervigilant state and expects more honking. A slightly more serious story. Yeah, and you've seen these. You've seen these in the United States. You've seen these in Britain. You've seen them everywhere. This is from the Toronto Star. And as restrictions are lifted, some are being left behind. Yes. Isn't there someone you forgot to ask? Oh, this is by Brendan Kennedy, described as social justice reporter. Speaking about his government's decision to lift various public health restrictions ahead of schedule, Premier Doug Ford, that's Premier of Ontario, expressed a popular sentiment about COVID-19 as the pandemic's second anniversary nears. Everyone's done with this, he said February 15th. Like, we are done with it. Thank God on March 1, we're moving out of this, and I just can't wait. Not everyone shares the Premier's enthusiasm, however. Katie Babcock wishes she could be done with COVID and all the disruption it has caused her life. But the 42-year-old marketing and communications professional knows that immunocompromised people like her can't simply wish their risk away. I don't have the privilege not to live in fear, she said. Babcock's life will actually become more constrained Tuesday when the province eliminates proof of vaccination requirements and capacity limits because she will be deepening her isolation in order to protect herself. If masking is no longer required indoors, her world will shrink even further. Oh, yes, public relations and marketing. So she's one of these email jobs. The public health measures some see as restrictive and inconvenient, she considers potentially life-saving. Babcock, who has a primary immune deficiency called hypogammaglobulinemia, said 4 doses of a COVID-19 vaccine, but her doctor said she should act as if she is unvaccinated, so the vaccinations are useless then. Her body doesn't make enough antibodies, and even with 2 booster shots, she may not have a sufficient immune response. Look, I'm not going to say that this woman is making this up or exaggerating it, but did she go out before COVID-19? Was she wearing a mask constantly for COVID-19? Because there are other respiratory illnesses out there. Common cold, influenza, pneumonia. I could go on. But, oh, yes, and we get this statistic about, 14% of Canadians are immunocompromised. Yeah, 14% had a compromised immune system. Yeah, all right. Yeah, what is a compromised immune system supposed to be? Anyone who's had an operation of any seriousness has for some time a compromised immune system. And here we have a person, an angry person with a disability awareness consultant, said that Ford's comments about being done with COVID-19 make him angry. You see, all must be pulled down in order to accommodate these people. And when these people say, oh, yes, I'm sick of it, I don't believe them. I don't believe a single one of them. They are reveling in the attention. They have watched the all in this together spirit of the pandemic's early days become replaced by an everyone for themselves ethos. It feels like people don't see my life as worthy of protecting, Babcock said. Maybe we should just shut down society and the economy forever so that this woman never gets sick. And, oh, yes. I guess I missed the end of the truckers movement, but the show goes on. And if you didn't understand that the Liberal Party of Canada is full of creeps, the worst people on earth, well, this is from Roberto Wakewell Cruz at the Post-Millennial. Trudeau's public safety minister says Emergencies Act was necessary because truckers were potential rapists. Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino said that members of the Freedom Convoy were threatened to rape residents of the city of Ottawa. There were Ottawans who were subject to intimidation, harassment, threats of rape, says Mendicino. He made the comments while testifying at the Commons Public Safety Committee in response to a question from Conservative MP Raquel Dancho, who later questioned why Cabinet would allow politicians to freely walk through the protests if there were known threats of rape. That's a good question. But as I always like to say, video or it didn't happen. Oh, they were constantly screaming at people who were wearing masks. Let's have one video. Let's just have one video of these truckers screaming at some idiot wearing a mask outdoors. A woman, let's find out who she is. Economics/IR columnist, been published in the National Post, Foreign Policies. She has a couple of published books. Her name is Rupa Subramanya. And she's not buying what Mendicino is saying. She tweeted, "Thanks for asking the right questions, Raquel Dancho. I, as a female person of color, spent hours talking to truckers and protesters, sometimes late into the night, and not once did I feel unsafe. It was so dangerous. How do experiences like mine conform with the official narrative?" Well, Mendicino had previously singled out the truckers as Trump supporters, and he effectively equated being a Trump supporter with being a criminal and a terrorist. That's what politics have devolved to in my country. Let's take a look at Alex Berenson's Substack, Unreported Truth. And of course, he has an excellent book called Pandemia, which I highly recommend. Speaking of censorship, the Food and Drug Administration just answered my Freedom of Information Act request for its discussions with big tech companies on COVID misinformation. You'll never believe what happened next. Yes, dear requester, please find attached the response to your request. And certain information has been redacted. We've also located records. We will refer those records and we'll respond to you directly. I want to read that. And redacted. It's all redacted. I'm sure whatever they were talking about was really interesting. Berenson comments. And let's see. Here's another one. Whole page redacted. Here's another whole page redacted. And it goes on like that. Hey, at least FDA responded. Health and Human Services and the Centers for Disease Control haven't bothered. I'm sure they're not hiding anything, except they're literally hiding something. What if it's coup in slow motion? Berenson asks. The old man is losing it. Age hasn't been kind to him, and COVID knocked him sideways. He used to be paranoid in a good way. The way you're paranoid now, he's practically psychotic. He sees conspiracies everywhere, and he can't stop talking about restoring the glory of the motherland. Now the ghost of Stalin whispers to him every night. So we know who this is about. But let's get back to COVID-19. Suffer the children. VAERS, the Federal Side Effects Reporting System, has received more than 500 reports of life-threatening events, permanent disability, or deaths following mRNA shots in kids and adolescents. And there's an even worse story in this regard. Responding urgent. 6 weeks after becoming fully vaccinated, kids under 12 are 40% more likely to be infected with COVID than those who never received mRNA shots, a huge New York State database shows. The mRNA jabs provide some protection for the first 2 weeks of full vaccination, but it declines rapidly, turns negative by the 5th week, and more sharply negative in the 6th. Negative vaccine efficacy means that vaccinated people are more likely to become infected. It is not clear how high the increased risk may become for young children, since the database only covered 6 weeks and the trend worsened each week. And yes, worse than useless, actively harmful. But no, let's get them all vaxxed and boosted as well. I suppose this is shocking stuff, but I should suppose that very many people out there are shocked by it anymore. Take a look at a Daily Skeptic. You know, British Columbia was not doing that bad compared to provinces like, Ontario and Manitoba and Nova Scotia, who went completely nuts. But no, we were just, it's like the tortoise and the hare. Don't bet against the tortoise. And what do we have? Jet2 becomes first major airline to drop mask requirement. Respecting alphabet people's rights is important, but it's not the main thing that distinguishes Britain from Putin's Russia. Well, I'm glad to hear that. When did all this become so important, and why? And why is it? Oh, do they throw homosexuals in prison in Russia? No, they don't. It is against the law to propagandize children, school children, with homosexual and alphabet people agitprop. That's what it is. How much gold has been stuffed down the coffers of the green activists? In wartime, dissent should not be confused with disloyalty. Yeah. I was listening to Tucker Carlson last night, a YouTube video of his monologue. And he was saying that there's no one in America who is, on Putin's side. That's not true. He must understand that it's not true. I know he's trying to protect himself because he's being called a traitor. But, Putin has some supporters. And he was really setting up a straw man there, which is disappointing. And, oh, yes, you may have heard that on Saturday Night Live, they actually had some satire last Saturday. You had two couples eating dinner, and they're saying, hey, maybe this whole thing was overblown. Maybe masks don't work. Maybe vaccines. And they're all going, careful. No. Shocking revelations. Of course, these people are going to say that they were never, I was never on the side of the terror. No. Where would you get that idea? I wasn't demanding that people who didn't get double and then triple vaccine got fired. No. Where would you get that idea? This is monstrous. This is a monstrous charge. But I predicted this, well, it's 2 years now. 2 years. That 2 years ago, I said on one of my first shows that this is going to be entirely destructive, that it's going to destroy world economies, that it's going to destroy society. It's just going to fill people with panic, with terror, with depression. And the people who engineered this against all of the available evidence are going to pat themselves on the back and say, good job, which is precisely what is happening. And what else do we have here? I'm on Putin's side too, says Matt Beck. Don Willis, good night. Okay, love to all the real freaks and freakniks, says Don Willis. Oh, me and Taco are going in alone. Biden watch sigh. Why isn't Biden invading Mexico? KMG negative for the first 2 weeks, so the protection window is tiny, like 3 weeks? I don't quite understand that. What if Russia unleashes attack while the mummy is speaking? Does the virus survive a low-yield nuclear blast? I've seen, apparently, government warnings on this, or government, advice, actually in the event of a nuclear blast. You're in your bunker or whatever, but you should stay at least 6 feet away. Because that's how radiation sickness works. Good for Jason Kenney for banning COVID restrictions erected by municipalities, say Metal Mike. He's been all over the place on this, Jason Kenney, all over the place. But better late than never, as they say. All right, I think I'm going to wrap it up now. I'll have a full show tomorrow, which is Wednesday. And perhaps I will be less hit. No, I'm not. I'm not going to be. I'm going to be. I think I'm going to remain hideous based on the history of this wound, at least till the end of the week. But I'll leave it at that. And once again, happy Shrove Tuesday and St. David's Day. Again, I'm half Welsh, and so I say this to all Welsh people watching this. I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Thank you all for tuning in. I greatly appreciate it, especially after the interregnum there. If you'd like to make a donation to the live stream, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. And if you're in Canada, donations may be made to the live stream directly via Interact at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this: in these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do really wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.